Thanks. I'm Jackie Neapole, and I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Research Institute for the Advancement of Women. And so we're kind of coordinating the Beijing+30 Network. We were the recipient of the funds because WAGE provided funds to support the work this time. So we know it's really important, this grassroots work that we do in the movement, and it's often off the sides of our desks, almost always.
Yeah.
But we were lucky in this time because WAGE provided some funds to support this work that was already underway. And so, and that I think is, before we get into the more of the meat of the issues, I think the institutional mechanisms is a piece of the Beijing Platform for Action that we really need to think about and talk about and really support. So that's that overarching critical area. So it is a critical area, but without a strong institutional mechanisms for the advancement of women, it is almost impossible to have advancement in any other area. And part of institutional mechanisms is ensuring a strong, vibrant women's movement and feminist movement. And that means that the institutional mechanism like WAGE, they rely on us to support them, and we rely on them for support to do our important work. So, let me look at my notes here. So, since 1995, I'm going to sit down if that's all right, and then we'll just, but since 1995, there has been some progress, of course. And I think it's important that we look back over the past 30 years and take stock of what has changed in Canada. And of course, it's incomplete. This is why we continue to do the work that we're doing. But that's how we're going to frame the discussion, is we're going to look at what progress has happened since 1995. But then also the next phase, talk about what's left. What do we need to do to concretely bring us to the next stage and really, get to the root of the problems with the critical areas. And so that's how the discussion is going to be framed. We're going to start with just kind of taking stock. I did want to say too that this parallel report, the Missed Opportunities report, came up to, I think, almost 200 recommendations, and a lot of you have been involved in that work. And so there's no way, we could spend the hour and a half reading the recommendations, and we probably still wouldn't have enough time. And so what we had done is in January, we got together and we said, okay, how do we look at the 200 recommendations and kind of come up with some key priorities? Because the critical areas, you can look at them independently, but when you look at the key issues in Canada, the inequality, it's the intersecting of those critical areas. It's the issues and how it overlaps. And you pretty much cannot solve any of the inequality issues without dealing with all the critical areas. And so we're framing this discussion in a way where we wanted to kind of look at some key priorities that were developed from civil society. We collaboratively came up with these key priorities. And then we'll talk about how they intersect. And it's pretty evident, actually, once we start talking about it, how they overlap and intersect. So speaking from their experience and expertise, we have a few panelists here, and they're going to speak to the priority area that we developed collectively from this meeting that we had in January. And so I will start with some intros. So, Vicky Smallman on the end there. She is the National Director of the Human Rights Department for the Canadian Labour Congress, a longtime activist on gender equality and human rights issues. She has served on a number of advisory councils and boards at the national level and at the local level. She leads a team responsible for the labour movement's policy, advocacy, and campaign work on women's and human rights, anti-racism, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, Indigenous and disability justice. She's also a community research associate at Western University Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children. And so I'm going to move around because, I'll go with Robyn. So Robyn's next here. Robyn Hoogendam is a research and policy manager for Women's Shelters Canada, where she has worked since 2022. She has led action-oriented research in the nonprofit sector for more than a decade in areas like childcare, poverty, food security, and gender-based violence. She holds a PhD in public policy from Carleton University, where she focused on federal funding of anti-violence women's organization in Canada. And then next we have Debbie Owusu. Debbie is the co-director of policy and advocacy at Action Canada for Sexual Health and Rights and was previously the executive director of the Canadian Centre for Gender and Sexual Diversity. Debbie has been instrumental in advancing the rights of 2S LGBTQ+ youth and communities and has spoken at parliamentary and Senate standing committees. Debbie has held, Debbie has held several advocacy and policy-oriented positions in government and non-profit organizations. She has continued to dedicate her time to local progressive organizing, including most recently as a commissioner for the Ottawa People's Commission on the Convoy occupation. And then beside me is Ingrid Green. She is the interim chief executive officer at the Ontario Native Women's Association, the oldest and largest Indigenous women's organization in Canada. She lives in Northern Ontario. She has been with ONWA for 18 years and has worked in various areas to support the leadership and well-being of Indigenous women and their families. Ingrid is a proud member of the Grand Council Treaty No. 3 Nation and a registered member of Lac Seul First Nation. She is the mother of amazing young man and auntie to many nieces and nephews.